The Adventures of Cats. But in any case, yeah, so we were just sort of talking about the challenge of, Patrick suggested that we should think about some way of kind of organizing or indexing or tagging, so that it would be easier to navigate in this shared vault. And it strikes me that that's a slightly different process, perhaps, than what we would do for ourselves. But it has been a little bit more difficult, as it sort of gets bigger and bigger. It has been a little bit more difficult to kind of find stuff that I have been using. I've really been sort of using the changelog as my, as kind of my way of seeing, what's, what it is that people are interacting on. And so I think that, so hopefully Chris will be here today, because I think that his essay was something that that people were interacting with a bit this week. I thought that was, yeah, I guess I'll wait to see if he shows before I launch into my reactions. So how are things going for everybody else?
I think, well, I hope Chris comes too, but there's some IndieWeb event going on today that he is hosting that actually looked really interesting. So I don't know, fingers crossed he shows up, but it does seem like it looked like a 4-hour long session on personal libraries or something like that. So we'll see.
Okay, that might make it hard for him to do both. Can't be in both places at one time. Yeah, so I noticed that there is a, speaking of, we've been talking a lot about gurus over the past couple of weeks, and Tiago Forte's got a book coming out in mid-June on how to build a second brain. And I was reading the advertisement for it on Amazon, and it does, for the first time in history, we have instantaneous access to the world's knowledge. So, that whole shiny new thing.
Are you suspicious, Dan?
I am.
Or skeptical, maybe is a better word.
I tend to kind of agree. Hi, Miguel. I tend to kind of agree with the idea that these that some of these books lean a little bit too far into having the one true solution, and that I mean, but then again, this is, that's probably a flaw of the way we communicate knowledge, and especially the way that that mainstream, because this is Tiago's book is coming out from Simon and Schuster, so right, I'm sure that in the process.
What does that mean, though? I don't really know the implications of that.
Well, it's a trade, so it's trade publishing, so so I'm sure that in the process of of working up a proposal for a book like that, you have to make some type of broad sweeping kind of claims about its effectiveness and its utility for large populations of people. And I think that was one of the things that sort of came that came out to me in the the conversation that I was kind of watching happen in the vault this week. Oh, there's Chris. Chris, we're glad you're here, and we don't have to talk about you in your absence.
Well, I just see it on the video later anyway. It's okay.
Yeah. So yes, you would. But we, yeah. But you're right, Justin. It's gotta have a hook. It's gotta have that that appeal. And of course, he's being heralded as one of the world's leaders in in productivity and whatever, yada yada yada. And so
I did miss a bit of context. So Tiago has a new book coming out, is
Yes.
apparently?
Yes, Tiago has a new book coming out called Building a Second Brain, a proven method to organize your digital life and unlock your creative potential. June 14th. And, you know, and so we were.
The unwritten context there too is a book like that is considered a bestseller if it can hit 10,000 copies.
Mhm.
And usually they'll give you that contract with the expectation that you're going to hit that number or come close at least. If you have a pre-existing platform that will ensure selling at least that many copies. And the fact that he's got enough people following his site on social media means he's got a platform to help them try and sell that many. So from a commercial standpoint, we'll give you the book contract because we know you have enough people who, even though they've taken your courses, will buy that book anyway.
Right.
So.
Right. So it's coming out. I think it's coming out from Simon and Schuster, and it is, and it's already listed as the #1 new release in business project management on Amazon. And so, and it's not coming out till June 14th. So apparently maybe that's on the basis of pre-orders. Who knows?
Well, the thing is, you won't have to read it.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny too, because that is one thing that I have been noticing is that every new book that comes out, almost simultaneously, one of those, short notes, what used to be cliff notes, or but everybody's publishing these little things, that will tell you what this book said, so you don't have to read it, kind of thing, and making money at it apparently, which is kind of mind blowing. But I did. I think there was a lot of conversation I noticed this week about this idea of kind of one size fits all prescriptions. I mean, even Tracy, oh, you're here. Hi. Tracy was sort of expressing some frustration with Ahrens in the final chapters, or at least, I don't know if it was specifically about the final chapters. Was it, Tracy, or was it just kind of you were fed up by the time you got to the final chapters?
I think Tracy put in chat that they'd be back shortly. So,
all right, let's
Tracy,
see. Oh, all right.
They'll be here at the moment.
Something else happened over and got on top of my chat. Okay. Yep. Will join us momentarily. Okay. Cool. So yeah, what's going on in chat? Yes, Tiago's online course is super expensive, and apparently that's something that is becoming popular now, because apparently Ali learned that from Tiago, and so now his part-time YouTuber thing is also tremendously expensive. It's I guess it's a cool gig if you can do it. But one of the things that did kind of strike me about, I had originally sort of planned that we would, we would kind of go through and talk about, Ahrens each week, for part of the time. Last week we spent, more than the first half, a little bit more than the first half, kind of talking about the, about our processes, which actually I thought was very interesting, and maybe more interesting at this point than than what Ahrens has to say in the final couple of chapters. Although I'm happy to talk about the last couple of chapters, but I'm more interested sort of in things like Tracy had created a series of notes about process, right? About fleeting notes and reading notes and permanent and all that. And I think that is, I've been interested, and that was kind of one of the things that I was hoping for in this, was that I would see sort of the techniques that other people are using, and and have a chance to think about, for example, with Tracy's, I'm as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, do I need to keep track of the dates, and I'm not convinced of that. But yeah, Justin.
So like you may have seen the picture I attached to one of my things where now I've got this like hybrid system, because Stan advocated for Johnny Decimal, and so I took another look and read through it, and so now like I don't want it to get like super overcomplicated, but like there's stuff that's not a fleeting, well, it's more than a fleeting node, but not ready to be a permanent node, and like really more of a commonplace thing. Where does that go? And so I kind of got this like hybrid thickness, like Zettelkasten is one area in the Johnny Decimal system, and then I've got all this other stuff like projects. And it seems like right now, it seems like, I'm in the early days, I'm all like fever dreaming about it probably, but it seems like it's going to be a useful system for having a place to put things as I get ideas. And it all goes in the inbox fleeting notes to begin with, and then the next day I go through and sort it into where it belongs. I'm a little worried that it's going to get overwhelming again and just be a giant pile of things that I can never find, because naming is hard and like consistency is difficult and stuff like that. So I'm trying to be a bit selective about what I end up keeping and what I just throw away when I decide it's not interesting. Right now it seems better than just it's multi-purpose, right? It's not just the Zettelkasten alone. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear people who are very experienced at succeeding with knowledge management, what they think, because I'm not experienced. So I'm just making it up as I go.
Okay. Tim, do you want to throw something in?
Yeah. You mentioned about the date, or even the date and the time. The one thing that I've sort of noticed with Obsidian come Rome type efforts versus, say, Evernote as a inbox and place to put, is that Evernote, for instance, is very difficult to timestamp, versus obviously the Zettelkasten come Obsidian method of naming the file. One of the plugins that automatically gives you that 11-digit number or something. I'm for research purposes, I'm more worried about where did I find it in the first place. It's because it's not always a reference. It's often a position of aggregation. So I might get, if I was talking about environmental history, I might get your book via something else. And it is something else that's just as important as your book, because there's something else might have and another one.
Right, or added some context, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, it's so in that terms, it's the context breadcrumb, as it were, as opposed to is the breadcrumb for my file reference back to wherever it sits on my physical system.
Yeah, it does seem like kind of that the date thing sometimes is a easy stand-in, like Zettelkasten, like the Zettelkasten numbering systems and things like that, that are date oriented, because that is a unique identifier, and that's a benefit, I suppose. But but I spent a lot of time mining the, like with the dawn of everything, right? I spent a lot of time mining that bibliography. So it would be valuable, I think, as you say, Tim, for me to know that, that my link to, something like, why information grows. I don't know if this came from that, but that was from that. Or what the source was, or if it was something that Chris said in the last meeting or something like that.
But particularly with Obsidian and the nicety of its very keystroke orientated rather than the in a GUI type approach, is and the split and the ability to split the screen multiple times over is. I normally work on a laptop, but I'm hoping to shift to a widescreen desktop soon, whereby I know full well that I would want, here is my day note permanently on the left, say, and here's a book I'm reading permanently on the right. And what I'm doing at the moment, where my work focus is, or my concentration is set, is on the thing in the middle, which would be Obsidian. But now, of course, I can have several Obsidians almost. Like I might have several versions of Chrome open, one of which has got my email on it and my newsfeed, and then the other one has got all the pieces I'm reading. And then I can pick up. There's a thing that allows you to. There's a extension that allows you to pick up the title and all of the URLs on that copy of Chrome or the ones you've highlighted. So it instantly gives me a complete list, and that list on some days gets to over 100 items long. So I know the title, although most URLs and the title match pretty close these days, unless you happen to be the BBC, because URLs at the BBC are all digital numbers. But there's an element of where did I go today, or where did I go last time I was looking at this subject? And so the day note needs a subject or an area of focus or an area of research, and then I can walk back through those and find when was the last time I did anything on Nicholas Luhmann, 3 months ago, pick up that day note and see what I did, and can carry on with almost no effort. And that to me is something that's not seemingly being well versed, but seems to be core to Luhmann's thing about I want to do what I want to do with no effort. Well, I think that that would be super. That would have been super valuable. I sort of get a glimpse of that sometimes when I'm looking at one of those drives that I've got my my stuff on from years ago, and I can almost imagine myself sort of in the midst of that, and and with all of those things, and thinking, God, I wish I would have had my my bookmarks, and all of the things that I was, that my history, my browsing history, from different sources that I was going to and stuff at that time. So it would be valuable to do that. I've also I've been thinking about, I've just started scanning microfilms, and I found this really cool way of scanning microfilms with a $169 Kodak negative scanner. So I don't have to go to the archive, and it's got higher resolution than the microfilm scanner, and so I'm so super excited. But it's actually led me to think that maybe I want to. I remember in the first book club, I think it was Bruno Wick had said he had a vault that was like 50 gigs. And he had all kinds of digital stuff in it, and that just scared me to death. But now I'm thinking, maybe it might make sense to put some content in there. Stan, you've been waiting patiently. Sorry about
that. No, that's quite all right. Been enjoying listening to it. Just to follow up, I think to what Justin was saying, because he was referring to Johnny Decimal. I don't know how I happened upon it, but when I did, I used to, keep all my work-related documents in these layers and layers and layers and layers of, directories, and I had, very good reason to do so. but the interesting thing about Johnny Decimal was the thesis that you only needed 2 layers of directories, and that gave you, this intellectual capacity for maintaining, as much or more information. And so, it's really worked for me. And I've been able, and I number all my documents. I prefix the file names with the Johnny Decimal directory number of all the documents. And so I can tell by the Johnny Decimal number where, what this exactly comes from. So, I've been it's budget season, right? So I can tell, all right, so 5 means it's Rensselaer, and 4, it's the research center, and 03 means it's a budget presentation. So 54.03, and so I know what file folder it is. And so I know exactly what this is and where it goes. It has the added benefit of everybody I pass the document around to asking, what the hell is this number? And pointing them to johnnydecimal.com. So, but I would say, and it did take me a little time to get used to, and sometimes you do have to reorganize and refactor, as I had to do a couple of times. But I think I've, really been able to separate it out now into, what are reasonable segments, from personal to university business to separate writing projects, and keep things organized in a way that it's a nice complement or additional tool to the personal knowledge management that comes along with using something like Obsidian.
Well, and I suppose that it can exist in multiple apps, right? If you use the same Johnny Decimal system in Paper and in Obsidian and in an address book and a library, and
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Right. Cross-platform,
Yeah, that does seem like it would be an advantage to just, sort of the map of content thing that I was trying to do a couple of weeks ago, where I was just sort of arbitrarily sticking things in folders and giving them numbers and names.
No, I use it with my Rocketbook images, and all the documents that I image with my Rocketbook that I keep for myself and send with the staff. So I label all the stuff that way. So when I'm searching my Rocketbook archives, I know exactly, I use the same nomenclature that I use for the, the stuff that's in my Obsidian directory versus what's in the regular Johnny Decimal archives.
Yeah, cool. Scott, I'm seeing a long post or a long thing in chat. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Sure. I was just basically responding to Justin's chain of evidence, where he was discussing the fleeting notes connecting up to the lit notes, up to the perm notes. And then I know I'm trying to cut off that fleeting notes level of it. So once my notes or books or anything get imported into my vault, goes into an inbox where I'll then process them into, normally I'll have like book notes, like all the Kindle notes from this. I'll go through, highlight, take notes. That'll get moved into my lit notes, which is a hierarchy of folders.
Mhm.
And then the perm notes are just going into one big crazy vault with the links in between. But I think my chain of evidence ends up in the lit notes as opposed to having that third layer, trying to cut out some of the extraneous notes.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was interesting too. Tracy, you said you were using an app that limited you to 7 fleeting notes before you had to empty it.
Yeah, I discovered the Tot app. It's only Mac, but it does your desktop or your laptop and your devices, which I find is important because I'll run across an article on my phone or something and I want to read it later. But what I've noticed, the tools that I actually tend to use over time that don't just become a giant mess have these constraints or restraints in them. And Tot basically gives you 7 notes, which obviously aligns with 7 days of the week, but you can use them for whatever. And then, I mean, obviously they can get as long as you want. I mean, and then it gets a little crazy sorting out everything you may have dumped in a single note, but you still only have 7 notes to go through. So I find that could be an interesting way to kind of contain the fleeting note mess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And an incentive to empty it so that you can put more stuff in. Yeah. Yeah. That's a thing that's a problem that I have with my voice memos on my phone, right? I'll be walking and listening to an audiobook and I'll leave myself a voice memo on it. And I had been trying to use like Air or things like that, which again were shiny new apps. But I found that voice memos worked well enough. The only problem was that then I had to go back and get them. Right. One of the things, Stan, going back to the idea of having an organization system that spans multiple sort of apps and workflows, I think is interesting, because one of the things that I stopped doing when I left Rome for Obsidian was I stopped doing all of this kind of daily tracking of stuff, of just all kinds of random things that I like to track, like my steps and my calories and just all of that, and there were cool little tools in Rome that I was using for those, and sliders and this and that. And it just occurred to me that some of these things are better in their own places too. So I'm sort of leery of trying to stuff too much. And I noticed there was some talk about that whole kind of one size fits all, stick it all in some place like Obsidian. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the mistakes or problems I see a lot of people running into, or at least mentioning they run into, and that happens over and over and over again, is I'm trying to keep all this stuff, and they keep it in 57 different places, which means you have no chance to search and find anything ever again. And the nice part about Obsidian, or whatever tool you choose to use, is you can keep it all in one spot. That's always going to be there. So even like Stan, I've got a Rocket book and a couple other notebooks, and I've actually built a system so I can take a photo of them. It will automatically save a copy of that to the cloud, where it gets OCR'd and then dumped into 2 different repositories that I use, and one of which is Obsidian. So even if it's a fleeting note and I never use it again, and I have a folder that has several thousands of, what we would all call fleeting notes, I'll use that term as common, it's all there. Now, I may not choose to use it immediately, or it's not something that I want to turn into a permanent note anytime soon, but I know it's there. And if I search for it, I'm going to find a word or a tag, or I'm going to find a date or a timestamp that lets me get back to it. So, and like Stan, I'll use, I've probably got over 7,000 the last time I counted, little indices or head words that I use. So I'll be able to find the thing again by looking it up and even narrowing down a time frame. And then it's there and I can do something with it. So if I'm working on a particular project, I'll be able to actually find it. So if you tag it or categorize it as you're doing it, it becomes a whole lot easier to find it later on. But doing that quick search function to find that thing instead of thinking, oh wait, was that an article I saw on Medium, or did I bookmark it with a heart in Twitter, or was it something I saw on Facebook or somewhere else, or is it in this notebook or that notebook? Over time, that will kill you, because you know that thing and you'll never find it again. But at least this way I know if I look for it in one place and one place only, it's gonna be there. And having that safety net like put under you as a trapeze artist trying to do any of this stuff is super key, I think.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful, and that is one of the things that I think, although I think I kind of agree with you, Tracy, that Ahrens maybe leaned a little too much into the pop psychology. That little touch that he made to David Allen, where if you take something like that off your mind, you're better off. I think that's probably a useful thing to remember. Tim.
Yeah, I really hate that one size fits all, where it's a whole series of arbitrary things. I mean, there's a level to where, yes, you've got your shopping list, you've got your shoe size, and how many steps did I do 18 months ago? Am I doing more? Has, for most part, absolute zero to do with being able to produce some sensible content. So why would there be one place to fit everything outside of, at the moment, it's all on one laptop and one set of backups. But it's I wouldn't want it on one app, simply because periodically the app changes and you've got no choice over it. The amount of stuff that you can't get hold of now that I've commented or said or posted on, say, Facebook is just ridiculous. So it's now a case of, do I therefore go back and copy the whole thread from Facebook somewhere safe, under my control? And that's why it's Obsidian rather than Rome. I looked at Rome, thought it was great, but didn't really get on with it, and sat back down, carried on with basically Evernote and decent sized Word documents, etc. And then Obsidian came along and it looked a lot more sensible. But I don't want to track my weight daily or even weekly on something other than either a piece of paper or an Excel spreadsheet. And I just don't lose it because there's one spreadsheet for my weight. It's not like I'm going to have multiple spreadsheets, because I can have multiple tabs. And what are you going to do with it? If you're not going to use it, then why are you doing it? That's the collectitis problem. And that's in terms of collecting information that may or may not be useful at some time. I've got my copy. If it changes, I can go and get an update or whatever. And I sort of have this vision every now and then of the Charlton Heston going to visit his old friend who then dies in Soylent Green, the guy that collects all the books and the newspapers, so that the government can't change the story type thing.
Right.
It's always half sticks in my mind. But if it's information that's useful to make content in one place, and your content originator could be Obsidian as well, you might tart it up in WordPress or Word or whatever, depending on how you publish it later, then great. But I don't need to know that 4 weeks ago, I went through 6 eggs in 6 days. And the week before that, I did 24 eggs in 6 days. You know, it's of no consequence except to my in the inquiry into my unexpected death through food or whatever. Yeah. So I don't collect just one area of information. I've got multiple, and as a lot of us do, we have multiple interests. But if it's all basically one system or one place, albeit there might be a degree of different systems in terms of what type of tag you put on it, then you're always going to be able to find it because there's decent search engines for what's on your hard drive. There isn't a decent search engine for what's on your microfilm. Having spent a good part of my life playing with microfilm for a couple of engineering companies as well. We ended up by having to make sure you had huge indexes. And then somebody came along and said, "Oh, we put all this on the CD for you." You know, I ended up, I went from at one instance of like 9 feet length of microflash down to 25 CDs and a search engine. So all of a sudden, I didn't need the index. And it's a bit like Zotero and Research Rabbit. I can remember best part of 40 years ago, spending weeks in the stacks at university, going through the citation indexes forwards and backwards to get maybe 50 or 60 or 100 at most references. I could then go and find maybe 80 that were here, interlibrary loan for the ones that aren't here, and wait a week or two. Now, 40 minutes with Research Rabbit or dip into your Zotero collection, or is it your Zotero drive, as it were, and you can make a new collection for a new project, and you're done. It's just a matter of reading it all now, and that's much more enjoyable than spending days in the stacks and trying to find where you left your banana and sandwiches or something. I've worked as a librarian. I've built a few libraries, and I like them, and I still know my Dewey Decimal System numbers, but I wouldn't dare think of using a Dewey Decimal book number type thing as a precursor to a file name. I mean, I even hate those people that put the date on the front of a file name, because the day that you did it is generally immaterial. It's what is the name and what is the content. So that's why a search engine that looks through my laptop. I noticed somebody said about Copernic, which was great back in the day. I don't think it's that great anymore. Mainly because it makes such a huge index. I mean, my last time I used it, I think I ended up with like a 5 gigabyte index for Copernic. But now search speeds are so good, I don't need an index. I can just go put a few different words in, and off it can go and find it. It may take a few minutes, but it's certainly not a week in facts. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, actually, and that actually reminds me that I was going to come back around and ask Stan, how much, I mean, if you have these different things in a tool like Obsidian, how much of it ever talks to each other, right? Of these things in really kind of completely different buckets. Is there ever any crosstalk? Is there kind of any synergy there, or is it just a useful place to have all of this stuff?
My experience is, I guess I can't say that they talk to each other in the way that they're, that there's APIs, but will generate file names of generate file names by hand if I'm if I need them, if I need a document someplace within the Johnny Decimal system, whether I'm creating it by hand or whether I'm creating it via the Rocketbook. And my hand was up just to say it. I was I was with you, Chris. I mean, the nice part about this is, you can check off at the bottom, and you can send a Rocketbook document to one of to a set of different email addresses, so it can automatically go to your fleeting notes. At the same time, I send it to a staff member that's appropriate, and if it's appropriate, and so things can go all over the place, but they're interoperable. So the syntax of my documents might have the Johnny Decimal number and then a text string that itself is searchable. As I guess Tim was asking about, so it's still searchable in a standard, syntactical way, if you want to search in that mechanism. But what the file system structure allows you to do is that it's only at most 2 levels deep. So your search algorithm, whatever you're using or whatever's built in, doesn't, you don't necessarily need the, most efficient, thing that's, most efficient thing that's out there. But I found a system that's really, it's interoperable for me. So it's, Rocketbook, and I have all, different flavors. The big one, little pocket one, the recipe cards, and, and then the regular desktop, file system, which is interoperable with the, Obsidian file system, and then,
so it's
there you go.
Yeah. So there's one of the things that kind of strikes me about what you were just saying, Stan, about having the numbering system and then and then having the search capability is that there seems to be an implication sort of built into this whole Luan thing, right? That we know what we want to know, right? That we're reading with our pen in hand, and we're taking a note about the thing that we're reading to answer a question that's in our mind. So it's very, and it's ironic that so much, that Ahrens gives so much attention to this idea of letting it emerge rather than a top-down thing, because it's still kind of a top-down thing, right? That this is what I want to know about this, right? So having that complete search capability on the other end, that it can just go in and find words. And actually, that's kind of what I'm hoping to do with this. If I scan these things, and then I can, actually OCR the pages, then, holy crap. So that's going to be really powerful. I want to say something. It's too bad Miguel left, because I think he had been saying something that I wanted to respond to about the speed of input and output. But I want, before I do that, let's go to Simon and then Scott.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was sort of thinking about that actually in terms of, well, two things: organization really, and speed. And that's partly why I asked that question in the chat, which is what's it like when people are working in their slip boxes or whatever system they're using, and I've spent a lot of time in mine in the last 2 weeks, and one of the things that struck me was, firstly, I don't use any organizational system. So it's partly because I'm really kind of maybe too set on the idea of emergence, that if I'm spending energy and time constructing a system, then I spend all my time trying to figure out how this thing sits in that system. Mm-hmm. When I understand my work to be this note I'm working on, how is it in relationship to the entire box? Clearly not the entire thing, but what is its relationship to one card or one other note, and then other notes? And so there's something, and I guess my point to say that was that my experience in the last 2 weeks, and this is over a few years now, is that it's hard work and it's slow work. There's nothing doesn't feel shortcutty at all. It feels like it's kind of like deep labor and in an intellectual sense. And I guess I'm curious about what that's like for other people and how that sits. But again, that's partly because I feel like I'm coming from a slightly different perspective in terms of not wanting to create some kind of hierarchical or folder-based system for the notes.
Mm-hmm. Why don't we think about how we're going to respond to that question? And Scott, you go.
Sure. So my question kind of spun off that a little bit, but as well as what Justin threw in the chat regarding, he was talking about waiting for a nexus of notes to form before he puts stuff into his index or his perm notes. So my question was kind of, how permanent are your permanent notes? And are we getting stuck on the mental weight of permanent? So basically, what is the threshold for keeping information? I know as someone that's an oversaver, I try to keep all the other stuff. But if we're not putting into the perm notes, is it necessarily doing what it's supposed to? And we're just building up clutter elsewhere. So I'm just throwing it out there to the group. What is your threshold, I guess, for saving perm notes? And are you willing to go back and adapt them? Does it need to be something factual? How willing are you to put developing ideas and that type of stuff?
Yeah, I think for me, that's evolving. And that's been kind of one of the things that's been most helpful about returning to this book this time around. I think that Chris, it's too bad that he just had to leave, was sort of arguing for the put it all in there because it will be, it will be there at least if it should become available or if it should become meaningful. I think felt more like it was important to identify these things and make them really kind of my first set, the first time I tried to do permanent notes, they were like, transcendent, kind of little pearls of wisdom was the way I was thinking about it. This is my thing that I'm going to say that will be quotable someday. And now I'm just thinking, these are things that will be. And that's why I think I really like the direction that Tracy was going with the sort of the categorizing and kind of figuring out what type of note this is. Is this data? Is this is this a piece of an argument? Is this a counter argument or point or a counterpoint or what is it? And I think that all of those things, probably sort of qualify to be permanent notes, but, I probably want to distinguish between them so that I can easily look. I mean, I guess the idea is, right, that I should be able to know what they are pretty quickly when I go back and look at that note. That would be my, that was the thing, Nate. I only had like two. I had like permanent note 1, and then I had 1A, and then I think I had 2, so I wasn't really making a lot of progress, and I got kind of discouraged. Justin.
I can sympathize with that, being overly careful and like, no, it's got to be perfect before I put in the permanent notes. And so I've been trying to be intentional about like paying attention to what is preventing me from capturing things. So like my two thoughts on it, because this is obviously evolving for me as I put a lot more focus on how to go about doing this for myself this time versus in the past. It's just been collect and it'll make sense eventually, you know. And it's like, no, it never does. It just piles up and turns into a mess. So when kind of what I was to elaborate a little bit on the nexus idea is like, I'm trying to figure out, is like, is this interesting to me? Like while I'm reading this article on Medium or whatever, is this something that I genuinely want to like pay the second price on and invest in over the next several months to turn it into an idea? Or is this just something that, this is cool right now, it's neat, and by tomorrow morning I'm like, yeah, that was neat yesterday, but I'm not actually into that. And so if I see that happening like 3 or 4 times around the same idea, like, or related ideas that feel related but I can't see the connection, those are the things that I'm then like, okay, yeah, let's start converting those into permanent notes. And I don't try to make it publication ready like Aaron says Lumon did. Like I just try to make it like recoverable. Like if I read it a week later or a month later, like, am I gonna know what the hell I was talking about? So for that, it's actually helped to like go back and just read the notes I wrote a week ago and be like, does this still make sense? Is this complete enough? Like, and improve my writing there, which is not something I've really ever done either. So like, yeah, I don't want to be too discriminating, but I don't want to be too permissive either. So like, I'm trying to strike the balance to get there.
Yeah. So Tracy, you kind of laid out your process in these 4 notes. You want to say anything about the way you sort of bring these ideas through that and, and kind of promote them? Because I think that would be, kind of appropriate to sort of what we're talking about now.
Oh gosh, I feel like you guys are all way ahead of me on the tools. And I mean, I'm not even sure I have a slip box. I just have messes from decades of projects and reading notes and stuff. And I did sort of pick back up on this project, and I apologize. The first 2 weeks, just sort of stuff happened. Anyway, so after kind of outlining those 4 strategies that I'm trying to implement, I actually did go into my own vault, and I just decided I couldn't make heads or tails of all the stuff I'd already dumped in there. So I just I started over and I pulled it all out and just put it in an archive. Which is another question. What do you do with the stuff that you pull out, archive? It's like you mentioned earlier about your disks full of old projects and folders, and I have so much of that. But I think Chris's note, which I actually just discovered this morning, about the kind of 3 different types of personal knowledge management. He had a wiki, a commonplace book, and Zettelkasten, and he was trying to argue that these are actually quite different things, and people get them in this space now, get them confused. I think I really am looking for the functionality that a Zettelkasten gives me, which is being able to create this kind of set of ideas that I can be constantly working with, that is going to lead somewhere, that has momentum to it. And so, but I also know what my habits are through my life so far, and they really are focused on reading and engaging in conversation with books, articles, people, across multiple things that they've written, or videos that I watch of them, or lectures they've given, or something. So trying to put that into a process that I can actually implement in my vault and keep it going. I think was it Scott's question about what's the threshold of permanence, and to Simon's question about like how much structure do you want to impose. I think what I'm really seeking at this point is a flexible system. So the system itself is kind of permanent. The habits, the workflows are kind of permanent. but the content can keep evolving. So
Yeah.
I don't really expect that my permanent notes in my Flipbox are going to be fixed. They're going to keep evolving. And what I really want them to do is have that movement and momentum. Who was it that said in the chat about keeping your notes moving, keeping your system moving in terms of the content?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I think at this point, I'm seeking a permanent system or workflow or set of habits that I can, but at the same time, even the system itself is going to keep moving. And I realize the content is going to keep changing. I'm too interested in too many things. And, you know, the content, the constellations of notes on different topics and subjects is going to keep moving. So whether that ends up being separate vaults or just kind of clearing out and archiving and starting new projects, I don't know how that's going to work. So I'm sorry, that was kind of a swirl of thoughts, but that's kind of where I'm at right now.
No, I think that was, I think that sort of expresses where a lot of us are at, and on a kind of a process that, you know, that we all kind of have to go through to understand what it really means, you know, and my initial reaction, and it's too bad Chris isn't here to talk about his little essay that he wrote. My initial reaction to that was that as a historian, I thought that, you know, I do think that's interesting, that there is a lineage to this thing. But, you know, as a user, I'm less concerned of which thing it is and, you know, and how exactly we describe it. And I'm certainly not concerned with purity, right? With, you know, oh, this is the way the Zelkastan has to be done kind of thing. You know, and I am kind of curious about some of these things about, some of these ideas about, you know, does the index actually, is it, you know, what is its purpose? Does it actually help us to think, right? Does it help us to organize our thoughts? And one of the things, and actually, as I've been thinking about this, I've been sort of thinking about potential output, right, on the other end. And it does strike me that there are two very, very different audiences, right, for this conversation. There's the group that, you know, of us who are talking here, right, who are sort of interested in this from the perspective of our own sort of lifelong learning and, you know, and knowledge sort of projects. But then also, you know, but then I have students, right? And so then I think, okay, so, you know, so I'm going to take this and I'm going to put something about note taking at the front end of my writing manual. And it will be, and I think maybe that was what I kind of shared a little bit of your frustration, Tracy, with, you know, with Ahrens's kind of preachiness. But I think that part of the problem was it was very unclear who he was talking to some of the time, right? Was he talking to students? Was he talking to educators? Was he talking to nonfiction writers? He tried to have, you know, a little bit for everybody, but if he would have even just, you know, kind of said, okay, now I'm talking to you, that might have been helpful. It also strikes me that it might be a completely different thing, this thing that you're talking about, Tracy, and that I'm thinking about doing inside my vault to organize my knowledge and connect it for myself, might be a very different thing from going to output, right? So this next step, and I think that was actually kind of the weakest element of Ahrens's book, actually, although we're not really talking that much about the book today, but was the, you know, okay, so now how do you write? Because I think, you know, and it's kind of ironic, I'm having my my historical method students read I couldn't find it in my heart to make them read meta history, but I am making them read a Hayden White article about narrative. And, you know, meta history is just way too meta, and it's too postmodern, and it'll explode their brains. But the whole, you know, the whole idea that narrative is a thing, right? And that this idea of putting these, you know, I have all, you know, maybe I do, you know, at some point have all of these permanent notes, and I want to use them to say something, but then now I'm going to very arbitrarily put them in an order, right? And I'm going to say, okay, this is the way this is going out. This connects to this, connects to this. And I'm actually thinking, you know, does it even make sense to do that in there? You know, what would I do? Tag number them, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then, you know, and in my, I have a vault for my students where they have to read my content, my world history content, right? And it tells them at the bottom of each page, here's go back to this page or go forward to this page. And that was an issue that I sort of had with the whole idea of branching paths narratives in like Tinderbox and Storyscape, back in the day, was, what if you don't want it to be linear? So I'm thinking, maybe I just actually re-upped with Scrivener, because I'm thinking, maybe that's kind of the way to go to do output. But anyway, enough of that. Justin.
Now I've accumulated 3 points I want to make in my,
all right.
in my comments. So let's see. The first thing I wanted to say for like establishing a workflow, because I've collected notes and even used things like TiddlyWiki and file systems and all sorts of things for like literally decades now, and never made it amount to anything because I think I didn't have an established practice. And so for me, like having like collect the notes one day and the next morning at 8:30 or 9 o'clock before I start my workday, spend a half hour or an hour like reviewing them and deciding what to do with them, like setting aside that attention to do that. And that's like a lot to commit to. So I really had to trick myself and be like, I'm just going to try it for a week, and if it doesn't work, I'll abandon it and we'll try it again. And by like the 4th or 5th day of just doing it for a week, I was like, man, this is really helping. I'm going to keep this up for a while until I'd probably get interrupted by something and have to like reestablish the habit after a vacation or something like that. So that's like, but that's obviously something that works for me in my situation. Like I wouldn't advertise that as a one size fits all for everybody kind of thing, which just a side comment on, it seems like everybody always advertises this is the universal solution that everybody can use. And that is just like so wrong. I'm kind of personally angry that I ever believed that line, but I'm really glad I've gotten out of it. So, all right. Second point, does the index help you think? I think the really spending time with the notes is one of the kind of like subtext that Ahrens does say, but like is not really emphasized as like, I don't feel like it's pointed out as a key plank in the system of like, you really have to spend time with your notes and figure out how to connect them and mix them around and like notice the connections, and building your index up is, I think, one of the like reasons for do it. So reasons for doing that is to like establish the connections inside of your brain rather than in some database on a computer. So I'm really kind of eschewing any like automation in my systems. Like I'm hand transcribing all the citations just to like spend time with it. And it's like takes time and it's kind of a pain, but it slows you down and makes you pay attention to what you're doing. Building the links up by hand rather than using tag notes, I think was one of the things. Was like, it sounds like a great idea, but maybe it works for some people, but I don't think it's going to work for me. Like, because it's just too easy, too fast to like shove things in there and overwhelm yourself with connections that you never actually follow back up on. So for me, like convenience and speed are nice, but maybe they're not actually helping us work with our brains, which is what we need to be working with. And then the last thing is like the book you mentioned is the book targeted at educators or researchers or students. Well, it's also at least half a software manual, which is really, really frustrating. Like that's the part that really kills me when he just suddenly switches to describing a specific software and how to use it and how it helps you, which is also where Obsidian kind of falls down. Because like he talks about this desktop where you can move your notes around and put them next to each other and things like that. And Obsidian doesn't yet have a corresponding plugin for that style of working. And that, it's just the software manual. It's nice that he described it. It would have been nice if he just stuck to describing it as a feature and a utility rather than being like, this is how Zettelkasten and the software package works. But, well, nobody's perfect. Anyway, that's my comments.
Yeah, I think he initially thought that he was going to be sort of co-developing and marketing the app, and so he had some design ideas about it, and I think that never really kind of materialized. I do think that the time thing is super important, right? This idea that, that a lot of these things are designed to, to accelerate a process that maybe shouldn't really be accelerated in a lot of cases. Maybe we actually need to sit with ideas, for a while and wait for something to happen. So maybe this idea of, well, this is going to streamline your process and get you, from input to output in the shortest possible time, is not what we ought to be chasing. Tracy, go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the problem of time. Both, and maybe this is part of my objection for planning, why he's so against planning, is that planning, I think, tries to keep track of your time wasting or time that you're going to spend on a project and not let your life get away from you. But there's definitely that space between you find something, oh, this is super cool, this is really interesting, and then a day later you can't even remember, or a week later you've totally forgotten what it was that was so fascinating about it. But also to someone's earlier point about how do you find stuff later? I think this was Chris, his argument for why you need to have everything in one place so you can find it later. I mean, this happens to me like 3 months later, I remember something that I read, and I think that is exactly the point I need to make in this current context, which is the really innovative thing. It's something buried back there. And at the time, I didn't think it was that important. But then how do you find that again? Was it something you just saw and posted on Twitter? Was it something that you stuck in a note somewhere? Do you have reading notes in Kindle? What I have to, I mean, my memory doesn't work anymore. It used to, I could remember where everything was, but through the explosion of different platforms and media and places where you can accumulate information, now I can't remember. So yes, the whole time issue is very complicated. But the point I wanted to make was getting back to what you were talking about, Dan, about kind of meta history and then particularly kind of rhetorical genre. Like, what is the genre of a source? What is the genre of a type of writing that you want to produce? Is it a tweet? Is it an academic article? Are you trying to create a lesson plan for your students? I mean, these are, or historically, what types of genres were coming out of commonplace books or research notebooks or laboratory notebooks? I mean, Da Vinci's notebooks or something. I mean, what are you doing with what you're collecting? And it's, having studied like Church Fathers, they were very enmeshed in classical rhetorical methods, kind of, coming out of Greek and Latin classics, rhetorical genres. And Aristotle classified them, right? I mean, he had, you have specific types of things you need to produce, and here's the type of materials that you need to develop and coordinate to make this particular kind of rhetoric. And it was a great system for that culture and that society, because it actually explained to you, and that was the whole educational system, was to teach you how to do that. This is invention, right? This is organization, how you arrange your stuff. This is delivery. This is how you memorize it, because you're giving rhetorical political speeches to, in a judicial context, a deliberative policy context, or ceremonial context. Like, so the times and places where you had to produce were very fixed, and there were whole systems that guided you to develop your thinking and your materials for use in those contexts. We don't have anything like that today, except sort of academia, where you have, or maybe journalism, where you have specific genres where you produce in certain ways, and there are techniques and methods to get there. Right. So I guess the whole kind of rhetorical genre and the audience that you're trying to reach, and how are you capturing information, processing information, saving it, and then constructively producing something to fit one of those rhetorical contexts. And history is great, because it's, the kind of modern concept of history is that, there is a history, we can get the facts, it's very empirical, we have the documents, And of course, postmodern history is, no, that's not how history works. So like, have we switched genres? Like, what's the method then to like produce into that new situation? So I'm very convinced rhetoric is very important.
Yeah, but and though we still have, we still do discuss, the historiography, right? Before we move on to the sort of, our own argument and our own marshalling of evidence and all of that. So yeah, so I think there's a lot of different types of information that that if you're thinking about saying something in that type of field, needs to be, and that was part of what I wasn't initially kind of thinking counted as, as some of my permanent notes or whatever it is I'm going to call them. To go back to something that Simon said, I wasn't saying that. I think you're right. I think that that was what, and I don't know if Ahrens said it, but Luhmann certainly said it, and Schmidt would have mentioned it if Ahrens didn't. That Luhmann said he spent more time sort of sitting with and intending this garden than actually writing output, which is interesting given how much output he produced. So yeah, I think that is. And it was, and was it Chris that mentioned in his essay, the whole Itzhak Perlman, thing of, I did give my whole life to this. So it's not trivial at all.
I was being pretty literal, I think, Dan, as well.
Yeah, no, I think that what I was reacting to was sort of the do this and you will unlock this explosion of immediate insight and and sort of automatic emergent properties of and I still think that and that was something that really that in RBC2 was really kind of leaned heavily into, right? Was this idea of this that Rome was going to be the thing that enabled this moment of whatever, where the sum becomes greater than the parts, this emergent complexity. Go ahead, Gregory.
Yeah, just a few comments. Picking up that came in a little late today, so I've been picking up the themes of this morning's conversation. But what occurs? There's this issue. I want to bring, focus with respect to the questions that are being raised or the sort of frustrations or concerns. The numbering system, right, which is has been discounted, I think, in a lot of discussions about Zettelkasten today, and I've been wrestling with that. And I think, and I think this goes back to something Chris hinted at maybe in our very first meeting, and that I certainly was very sympathetic to, is the ontology of the note taking. There are really two entities, I think, that we want to focus on. We always talk about the individual permanent note, right, as the fundamental unit, and it certainly is. But I think if, the notes are numbered sequentially in, say, Luhmann's Zettelkasten, because it positions them in a line of thought, a line of thinking, right? And so I think we should think that there are really two things in the Zettelkasten: lines of thinking, I'll just say in a very general kind of sense, and the individual note. And, the nice thing about a numbering system, and I've been sort of, trying to develop my own numbering system, which is just a variation on Luhmann's to bring this out, I think, more than he does, is that there are really two kinds of links, right? There's the wiki link, which jumps you around, and that's what, normally we talk about as links. But when one note is consecutively numbered after another, right, that's a kind of associative link, right, that says this note is part of a line of thought which is being captured, right? And the numbering system of Luhmann's didn't really there's the idea of the neutral position on the one hand, right? That every number, it's just a space to locate things. But also the numbering system has to, bring forward this concept of an associative link. And obviously branches off, the same sequence of notes can be part of many lines of thought. And that's kind of the whole point. And that's where the emergence comes in. And so in wrestling with what should be a permanent note or how you should organize your Zettelkasten, with that in mind, I would offer two thoughts. One is a permanent note should simply advance your own thinking, right? As it's already represented in the Zettelkasten, right? Or, remember that Luhmann used header numbers as the very first number. So, when he started, he recognized, that there were areas that he was interested in thinking about. And each of those areas sort of at least initially got their own head number, right? But it wasn't a sharp distinction. It was just saying, okay, this doesn't yet relate to something I've already thought about, right? So I'm giving it a new head number. He had like 99 head numbers, right? And one of his Zettelkasten by then or something like that. But really that's just to get going, right? And but to the extent then that you have an idea or you read something, you think about something that genuinely advances your own thinking, that's where you want to position it. You don't have to ask yourself how to organize the Zettelkasten. You just have to ask yourself, how does this advance my own thinking or illustrate something, or you know what I mean? It appends itself sort of naturally to a particular thought or thoughts you've already had. And then you just use, maybe the most dominant association becomes where it's numbered, and the less dominant become weaky links, right? So you can trace things out. So that's sort of the criteria I'm trying to use to decide what should go, become a permanent note. In terms of organization, I don't ask that question. I only ask, does it advance my thinking with respect to particular? If not, maybe I started off with this new anchor, right? But generally I find, we're reading among things that are interesting to us, sort of Tracy is saying she has her different projects or pursuits. So, after an initial period, something you find interesting is probably going to be related to some line of thought you've already had. And that's why I'm sort of against the notes that are too long, right? I think each note should be potentially a step, an individual step in a line of thinking, so that you can branch from it, so you can identify to say, okay, this is, relevant to that step, or that illustrates that step, or this shows that there's something wrong with this step that I got to think more deeply about. And I don't worry about the organization. I think that, it's not that I'm speaking from experience, because whenever I worry about, gee, where does this go in some organizational sense, then I'm implicitly imposing some hierarchical notion that's kind of screws up the system, in at least in the way it's supposed to, allow you to be extremely flexible and let things just emerge. And it can be paralyzing, right? That's when you sort of get into trouble. So I think if we just limited the question to say, hey, it's, we're, this helps, this is related to something I've already thought, and it advances my thinking. But it's important to, however you do it, and this is the first point I began with, simply that you have a way to make those associative links that are not weaky links, so that you could identify kind of lines of thought as kind of a separate, like a molecule is different from an atom, I suppose. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, I think that is actually an interesting and a valuable thing that Ahrens kind of did stress, was figure out where it fits. Figure out the thing. And I have tried to sort of add that in as a thing, is where, what kind of root note, would this apply to? And some of the things that I've been sort of moving up and sort of upgrading into permanent notehood, I've had to make up, sort of anchor notes that don't exist yet, right? Like, okay, so I've got some ideas that I took out of Kahneman's book, right? Well, what do they connect to? And so that, yeah, I think that that's valuable in, I mean, and you're almost kind of psyching yourself out, right? You're identifying, you're basically making these little decisions at the time of writing each note that are votes, right? That are expressing your interest in, and your understanding of where this is going to fit, that you can then later look to and say, and that's the emergent part, right? Where you say, oh, it looks like this is what I'm interested in, right? Because this is the cluster. But yeah, so I think that is probably a useful discipline, is, and that is a new discipline for me, is sort of teaching myself to connect it to something, right? To say, this is the note that this goes behind, right? This is the sequence, or this is the train of thought that I'm already having that this connects to. And then, what are the source connections? And then what are the sideways connections? Yeah, I think that's, that I think is a useful, kind of exciting thing. So Justin, why don't you talk, and I'm going to read on, because there's a lot going on in chat.
Yeah, that's like that thing you were just talking about, Dan, is the same, like trying to discover what the micro nexus is that I have, without going back through all my past notes and trying to like recatalog, but just go forward and build it up again in the new system is what the like micro nexus thing I was kind of alluding to, is how I'm psyching myself into like, do I want to build this into my Slipbox thing? But actually, like, my question here is actually more of like the mechanics of what you were talking about, Gregory, with like, it's like what I don't feel like I have a great system for like numbering or organizing them. And I'm kind of relying on the breadcrumbs plugin for Obsidian, which seems to go down. Like you can start at a head note and descend the tree and see what's, actually rather, it goes the other way around. You can start at a leaf and go back up to the root easily. Like it automatically displays that. And there's a side view for kind of looking at it the other way. But it doesn't feel like there's anything that actually does the same sort of thing like Luhmann's, 1A, 2B, kind of numbering, where you can actually see the train of thought that he was producing. I haven't found a natural way to doing something similar to that in Obsidian, and I'm wondering if anybody else has solved that yet.
I'll just say that I have been developing numbers, but I'll write a note on it for our Zettelkasten this week, right? But just, I've redone his numbering system to create so that each note can anchor a kind of infinitely extensible two-dimensional array. So it recreates, it embeds that full space, anchor to another. But I'll write a note on it rather than go into, say it now. The one thing I will say is that titling the notes, right? Before Obsidian allowed aliases, it was just unworkable. But now the thing to do is I begin with the Luhmannesque number, right? And then the textual title. And then I immediately take those two components and make each one a separate alias, so that, when I'm just writing, I can link by way of text or by way of number independently of each other, right? And I have been trying to come up with, using templater or template JavaScript that will sort of automate the process of grabbing the number, right? And plugging it into the line of the alias, as well as the text part. And I haven't finished, but that's something that needs to be done, I think, to make this, that's one little piece of automation that I think would be totally worthwhile. Both my sons are software engineers, and if I can't figure it out on myself, I will appeal to them to have them help their father on this.
Yeah. I kind of glanced at breadcrumbs and then I sort of shied away from it. But I am using I did implement the thing at the bottom of each of our notes with the links, and I have been actually using that in my own vault, and that has sort of helped me, sort of remind me what linked and unlinked mentions have been useful too, because that's almost that whole kind of a full search capability. Simon.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this. It's quite interesting because the Lumen thing of, if you're imagining this a box where you're putting a note behind, this note goes definitely behind this note, and I just think I've just tried to mirror that quite literally, which is, and I quite like Greg, this idea of just an associated link. I just call it previous note, and it doesn't mean literally the note I was working on before, but it's and my experience so far is that there's quite a lot of work that goes into going, because sometimes it's very obvious. So this is the thing it connects to. It's the one I've just been writing. So there's a sort of quite a sequential link. But then there are other times where will be something go, actually, this can be placed somewhere else. So it's like the minimum for a note in terms of link is to just write previous link, and so that becomes that kind of that step backwards, which also, of course, is going sideways in a way that Lumen's box can do, but not physically, if you understand what I mean. So I find that really useful in terms of a kind of breadcrumb, and they eventually all go back to a sort of an emergent index, but I'm not too worried about that.
Yeah, that's exactly how I've been using breadcrumbs. It's just not feeling supernatural the same way I feel like the physical slip box with note cards would, which is also just a comment on digital systems, as they are not physical systems, and so they don't exhibit the same, like, what do they call it, affordances that you can use.
Yeah, and actually, ironically, some of the limitations of the physical system are its features. I am sort of, I'm shying away. I'm kind of allergic to automation a little bit as well, although I have reconciled myself to things like Readwise sweeps of my highlights into, fleeting notes and stuff. But yeah, breadcrumbs, breadcrumbs actually strikes me. One of the things that scared me away from Rome was the super elaborate system of, kind of crazy transclusional block quoting and all of that, all of those little magical things that struck me as being more of an exercise in software than in understanding my ideas. So it's 11:28 in northern Minnesota. Anybody want to have the last word? Okay, I think I'm going to be going to a conference in southern Minnesota next Thursday and Friday, and I'm going to be trying to come back on Friday night. So I should be available for Saturday. Initially, I was kind of hedging on that and saying I might not be available on Saturday, but I think we'll be able to kind of do this as planned and continue. So we'll talk about more about whatever happens in the vault this week and the couple of articles, the Luhmann 1981 article that he wrote himself, and then the Schmidt retrospective one.
Hey, Dan, before we take off, I think for those articles, like if you want to play around with hypothesis, as was mentioned previously, just maybe having a few notes in the vault about that or something would be useful.
Okay. I'll put a note in there about opening the PDFs with hypothesis and using them. Sounds good.
And if Chris is still watching the video online, just to say I completely disagree with everything you wrote in that note, Chris, just to let you know.
Yeah, I was thinking we should all sneak as many digs into Chris as we can while he's not here.
Yeah, I thought it might be kind of an epic battle there for a while, but it was. I think there were some good points made, and I do think that there is an interesting history. I'm not personally that convinced about how it applies to the way I should organize my workflow. But there's a lot of people have had a lot of results, and so maybe I shouldn't discount that. And people have had different results with different of these methods. So maybe I should consider that when I'm thinking about what's the best tool for the job that I have right at hand.
I had sort of like the first response was like, is Chris talking about me? But then I got past that and was like, I mean, there is value in seeing how these things have been used and not just throwing that out and being like, I'm going to make my own system. I don't care what everybody else is doing. But it's, at the same time, like you do need to tune in whatever you do to your own purpose. So
yeah. But I think that probably it does make sense to kind of look at the past and see, what has worked for people and why. And Tim, Zotero and Research Rabbit, yeah, I have been loving that combination. So yeah, we can talk about that too as well next week. So cool. Well, great. Thank you, everybody. This has been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed it. See you next time.